All right, guys, this is Norval Central coming back at you on the YouTube video. And I got my guy Nole Nation with me, man. How you doing?
I'm great, man. Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, man. You're doing a great job on all your social media accounts. Be sure to let everybody know where to find you at.
You can find me on Instagram at Nole underscore nation underscore.
Awesome. So many underscores, but we want to find the best content in Instagram for Florida State fans. And I know it's an exciting thing. The season is right around the corner on August 29th against New Mexico State. Fall camp is here. We just had our Jacksonville scrimmage recently there. And then we're also having our scrimmage tonight in Doak Campbell Stadium, technically Tallahassee, Florida. And it's going to be a great thing for Florida State. And I will ask you this question first before we kind of get into some of the things we're going to talk about. But do you think this is kind of early to have your second scrimmage? I mean, is this just me thinking, or is it just a lot of things?
Yeah, I think it's relatively early to be having a second scrimmage. I believe it was last weekend
Yeah,
we
yeah,
had our first one. But we are like 2 weeks away, 2 to 3 weeks away from game day.
yeah. And I want to ask you this too, because we just got off our Jacksonville practices. Do you think they're beneficial? Because I know a lot of fans on like social media have talked so much about like Florida State not being able to win a road game since November of 23 against Florida. And, are these practices even real? Because I mean, realistically, the mindset is like you go to these road environments, you're being away from home, you're staying in those dorms, you're being in that hot weather and stuff like that. And you basically lost 10 straight road games. Where does it end for Florida State? Do you think this is like a wise investment? Do you think fans are just overreacting? Or kind of what's your thought process about that?
I think it prepares you in
Mhm.
some degree for like an away game. I think that's kind of the idea behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times too, you want to get yourself away in unfamiliar territory. I know the Auburn Tigers recently did where they were staying at a resort, kind of like a cheaper hotel and kind of staying in line, even though they were staying at a Holiday Inn. This isn't like like any kind of low income type of hotel that maybe you can pay like $30 for to be able to have something like that. But I do think that this is an opportunity for Florida State to really get involved there. And I just wonder ahead of time, because I know fans are so pessimistic with everything. And I know the video that we're going to be talking about today is not something that we want to surround ourselves with pessimistic, but I think we need to understand like where Florida State is. You had a 7-17 record in the last 2 years. This isn't something Florida State fans are proud of. Obviously, you want to see Mike Norvell succeed. And I know he's on the hot seat. I understand there's a lot of pressures involved with this season. And you're getting involved with this second scrimmage as he's going to be talking to the media at 9 tonight. I want to kind of go over some question marks that maybe just haven't been answered or just we want to see a little bit more of. I think the first one and the most obvious one I want to talk about is Ashton Daniels. He had 28 touchdowns, 24 interceptions in his career at Stanford and then at Auburn. He's had flashing moments. He had that big comeback against Colorado in his Stanford days. And then he also had a couple of good games against Vanderbilt as well as Alabama, where he had over 800 yards, 5 touchdowns. You saw the potential in his game, but realistically, he's always been having those inexcusable interceptions or just boneheaded plays that you don't want to see again. And Mike Norvell has kind of infused the transfer portal with his quarterbacks, TJ Uyunglele, and then also Thomas Castellanos. And you're seeing teams like Miami where they paid up for transfers. They've done things in the transfer portal and they've been successful, but Florida State has not. So I just wonder if he can be able to kind of take the reins still. He's obviously going to be the starter, but you just wonder how he's going to be able to perform as the season gets closer because we're 3 weeks away. What are your thoughts on Ashton Daniels on as a quarterback, just as a whole?
I would say he's a decent quarterback
Hmm.
with an upside is how I would describe him. I think he can make plays, and I do think we've got like receivers and tight
Hmm.
ends and maybe even an O line to really, get him to shoot up, on his upside this year and be a really good quarterback. We've got the pieces around him. He's just got to get comfortable with them.
Yeah. What would be your next question mark? I know Ashton Daniels is kind of the pedestal of Florida State fans of what they want to be successful wise, but what are you thinking about your question mark?
I want to talk about Javen Boggs
Mhm.
and can he stay healthy? Because if he can't, you may have a guy like Tay Gelsey who comes in. You
Mhm.
may have a Devin Carter. You may see a Jason Lopez, coming in at that wide receiver three.
Yeah.
Uh,
I understand. It's a good problem to have because you have a Makai Danzey who's your wide receiver too, potentially. He's still working on his game. Obviously, he transferred over from that running back position to wide receiver, still learning the ropes, still learning how to catch, having that ball security. I know he's fast. I know he's super fast, track speed. But and Deuce Robinson is Deuce Robinson. Had those 56 catches, 1,056 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Obviously, you want to see the touchdowns numbers go up, but I think it's so important to have those extra receivers in your wide receiver group, like your wide receiver three, four, and five, emerging and stepping up because it seemed like a lot of times Deuce Robinson was the only consistent option you really had. Now, obviously, this comes from a Deuce Robinson that only had 2 catches for 14 yards against what was your most pivotal win last year against Alabama. So you want to see him more involved in those games. Like for example, when we play SMU in the very beginning of the season, you want to see him being able to emerge. That road game against Alabama, the road game against Louisville, road game against Miami. I mean, you got to have Deuce Robinson in those moments. And while I'm not saying Florida State is the most talented, those skill positions are very important for Florida State to kind of take advantage of. And you talk just like Jason Lopez. The kid has been absolutely phenomenal in what it brings to the table. He had that basically extraordinary catch, where he was actually over Chauncey Kennon, making a great grab from Kevin Sperry, a football that he thrown. Next thing you know, he's dabbing up Jordan Travis that he was in practice. And man, it was just a great thing to see. And at Chaminade, the Jason Lopez has had 1,000 yards in each of his last 4 seasons in high school. But here's the thing: Javen Boggs is very talented too. Deuce Robinson called him an NFL wide receiver. He was Mr. Florida for 2 straight years at Coco, and I think this is an important opportunity for him to be able to emerge. But he's got to stay healthy, like you said. It's just so disappointing that I think that when you have these playmakers that are so great, which kind of brings me up to my next question mark. I think Chroma is a guy that you have to really factor into because I think he's one of those playmakers that's a can't miss talent. I think at the running back position, we talk about all the time with Florida State having that musical chairs aspect last year, where they kept bringing in running backs, and every time a running back got cooking and going, you saw that Florida State just took them out. And I think with Chroma last year, he only had about 400 yards of offense, only 1 touchdown. It was one in the air. He hasn't even had a rushing touchdown. And you're going to basically name him as that top alpha male. I just think from that year one to year two jump, I want to see more consistency, especially on that kind of level, because anybody can be a Vandrevius Jacobs from a couple of years ago, be so great in the preseason, and he was such great in a camp setting, and then next thing you know, he kind of fizzled out. Obviously, he's at a different school now, but I just wonder how everything's going to go with Chroma because it's so important for him, Sam Singleton, Trey Wisner, those guys to be able to emerge because it almost looks like Chroma and Singleton are the two guys that look the most impressive. Wisner's kind of just hanging in the shadows, kind of figuring out what he is. But man, I just want to see if Chroma can put everything together because I think he can really be a special talent.
Absolutely. I think Chroma may be one of the best running backs in our backfield. And Sam Singleton, we all saw what he did
Hmm.
last year. He's
Yeah.
another guy that I think we can definitely use, and he can have a really good year this year as well. Wisner, I haven't watched a lot of his film. I'm not going to lie to you,
Hmm.
but from what everybody says, he has really good vision when he's got the football. So, I mean, maybe he ends up being in that RB2 spot, maybe the RB3.
Yeah, and the one thing I really worry about that brings me kind of my next question mark, and feel free to chime in anytime. Question marks like the offensive line, because those guys at the wide receiver position and those guys at the running back and even Ashton Daniels passing the ball, if you don't have that quality offensive line, you're not going to be able to do anything. And guys like Luke Pettibone, as well as Micah Pettis, those were two guys that Florida State really relied on last year, even though they didn't really get drafted per se. And they're still kind of hanging around and doing things undrafted wise. And there's a couple of guys on that offensive line that did really well at Florida State, but just didn't really pan out in terms of NFL aspirations. But I just wonder with this offensive line that you have, you're basically having maybe four transfers and one homegrown recruit and Andre Otto that's probably going to be your starting offensive line. You didn't really have a lot of injuries, and I want to knock on wood when I say this, but I do think that Florida State has an offensive line they feel really comfortable with. But you got to find those 7 or 8 guys because I'm not guaranteeing you that the injuries are not going to come. I mean, they come, and it's a physical, basically, position that you want to take advantage of. We want to have some stuff there. But I just wonder what Florida State's going to be able to do with that because I think it's so important with how everything goes.
Absolutely. I believe after one of the Jacksonville practices, Norvell came and spoke about it to the media, and he said that the O line took a significant step forward, which is something you want to hear, especially with the way the O line was last year,
Hmm.
and the year before that, the 2-10 year, which, oof.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you gotta hope that it's better. And I do think that we do have some guys that can make big plays
Hmm.
for this team this year. So hopefully no injuries happen. Hopefully everybody stays healthy. It could be interesting.
Yeah, you talked about the 24 year too with Darius Washington being that Swiss Army knife. But then Nate Paps is a guy that who is probably going to be your Swiss Army knife this year. Can play guard, can play tackle, can play a little bit of center. I just think that this is a guy that you have to be able to rely on, and you can't have a fallback. This is going to have to be a guy that's going to be a fringe starter, probably at your right guard position to start off with. Hopefully, your tackles stay healthy. Like Xavier Chaplin, Chimdia is another guy also from Stephen F. Austin that you're going to have to rely on too. But I just wonder, will a John Daniels, will he be able to step up and kind of be your guy there as your backup tackle? Nothing's wrong with him, obviously, but he's a younger guy. You want to see him develop a little bit more. It's the same thing with Sandman Thompson. When you have a guy like Braden Joyner, in your system there, he's a redshirt junior. I just wonder if Sandman can kind of get up to his physical strength. He's kind of a little bit on the shorter side, 6'1.5", 6'2". You want to see a little bit more production out of him. But I just think it's a lot of risk to be able to have, and you're hoping that some of these offensive linemen that you've gotten in the last couple of years can be able to develop, and you're not having to rely solely on transfers because if those transfers don't pan out, it's going to be a problem.
Absolutely. Then you're gonna have to rely on guys like Johnny Daniels and
Hmm.
Jaden Todd, who's another high school
Yep.
recruit. You gotta hope that they can come in and make some plays.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to talk about another thing that I know Florida State fans have talked about. Florida State relying too much on the transfer portal, and that's the defensive line. We've come from a university that's had to rely on Jermaine Johnson and Jared Verse and different guys like that. Even Patrick Payton was a homegrown guy. You thought you were going to have a lot out of him. He transferred out. And you're having a guy even last year in James Williams who you thought was going to be phenomenal for this team. He was reunited with Tony White and Terrence Knighton and guys like that he was with Nebraska, but he just never really panned out. It was kind of a disappointing aspect. With the Desir twins kind of being that situation that everyone is so excited about, what do you think is going to happen with some of these guys? Do you think they're going to be able to, do something? Or do you think it's just going to be all talk until we find out? Because let's face it, Kevin Wynn has not really been discussed. We got to figure out what's going on with him. And, this defensive line has still got some question marks that we need to be answered.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we all saw last year the Desir twins were probably one of the most talked about guys
Hmm.
coming in, and really, Mandrell was the only one that was really, you know, was really good.
Yeah.
You had Daryl who had kind of a lackluster year.
Hmm.
Definitely room for improvement there. And you talk about Kevin Wynn, that's another
Hmm.
guy that just like Javen Boggs has the injury bug has just been all over. Um, Obviously, you're hoping to see a lot more out of him because he's a former
Hmm.
4-star prospect,
Yes.
and he has high Darrell Jackson upside. He
Yeah.
can be that guy. You just got to see more out of him.
Yeah, and I
And
kind of
what
worry a lot because the staff talks about so much about Daniel Lyons. And I get he's a redshirt senior, he's been around for quite some time. But I mean, the most he's had has been about 37 tackles, maybe two and a half, 3.5 sacks, it's not really been much production. But he talked about it before. He's a Florida State guy. He's a Nole. We've seen it. The guy's been here for a long time. I didn't think he was going to stick it out because a lot of guys in this age of college football are just wanting to transfer out. They're wanting other opportunities. You talk about Mandrell Desir. He had 6.5 sacks last year. Five out of his last 6 games, he had 5 sacks. This is a guy that wants to be great. But the problem is, there's going to be a lot of teams out there that go ahead and try to double team him. Who will step up? Diamante Diggs is a veteran that they really like to see, but we're tired of seeing about these veterans that don't really pan out. We talked about last year. Tony White had actually brought up Jaden Jones, who's now at Missouri. Didn't really do much at Florida State. Didn't. I mean, it was just kind of a very disappointing stretch there. I know Jaden got hurt and all, goes out. Best wishes go out to Jaden Jones, and nothing to say against him, but at the same time, you're trying to figure out what you have in this defensive line. And I mean, realistically, when you look at it, is Daryl Desir good enough to do it? I mean, he had 1.5 sacks last year. He has the potential. They talk about the Desir twins all the time. Rylan Kennedy, transfer from Texas A&M. It looks like he's just scratching the surface of what he can be. 2.5 sacks last year, and he was behind some quality defensive ends. But it's like, man, you're relying so much on unprovenness and inexperience and guys like that. I guess that's the risk you have to take, but at such an important and pivotal position like the defensive line where it impacts the quarterbacks, it impacts their game plans and what they bring to the table. And let's face it, Daryl Jackson, like you said, is not there in Tallahassee anymore. 6'5", 337 pounds. And you saw basically what happened when a good rushing attack attacks this defense when Jaden Baugh had 225 rushing yards. I mean, you don't want to see that again. And it comes to a point where you have to figure out, okay, what is going to be the factor of what Florida State's going to bring to the table? Because yes, you defended Alabama really well, but as you saw throughout their season, they couldn't run the ball. So when you have a team that runs the football efficiently, let's just say probably your best test that you had in a win was probably Wake Forest. They had Claiborne, that running back that was averaging like 90 yards a game. They did pretty well to neutralize him. But when it come to the last game of the season, emotions were running high on the road. You have to be able to stop someone. And I mean, teams like Louisville, teams like Miami are going to run the football. Mario Cristobal does that a lot. He attacks the line of scrimmage. He wants to run the football and basically overwhelm you. I think when you have guys like that on your defensive line, you have to be better at being able to get through the run. It's great to have three safeties and all, but if those safeties are not doing anything, what are you going to do?
Another guy that on that defensive line, just real
Mhm.
quick, Deontay McCray is a
Yeah.
guy sure hoping you
Hmm.
see a little bit more production from.
Yep.
That's a guy that I think has a really good upside. He's
Yeah.
just got to stay healthy. I do believe he went out early with a injury last
Yeah.
year.
And that's the thing too is I wondered because he had Mason Heinschel back up for a sack against Pittsburgh, and that was one of his more embarrassing moments. But it was like he was getting ready to have a sack, couldn't be able to bring it in, and the next thing you know, wide open touchdown. Pitt takes the lead. Late in the game, you got to have those moments. And I think McCray understands, as a veteran, this is his last year. He wants to be able to do something. He's kind of that hybrid defensive end, defensive tackle. He's gained a little bit more weight, so he's up to about 300 pounds now, 295. And I think this is going to have to be his year. I mean, you're going to have some of those guys step up because you had a John Walker, the UCF transfer defensive tackle that went to Ohio State. You basically missed out on that opportunity to get him. Now, will you be able to regret that? I don't know. Because you have a Jordan Sanders who you brought in from Texas State. It's just so many unproven pieces that I just wonder, which kind of brings me to my next point with the second level of the defense. You have a Chris Jones who's a heat seeking missile. You have an Isaiah Williams who's a very talented true freshman, but he's a true freshman. You have Omar Graham Jr. who's a veteran, and then you have Makai Gaber, and then you have Blake Nicholson who's another senior. You have so many different guys that you can be able to put in there in that rotation, but how are they going to factor in? Ernie Sims is no joke in an assistant coach. He's no nonsense. He's former Nole. He wants to be successful. He wants his program to be successful. But I just wonder, I mean, if you're not able to cover in space, Caleb Valley, for example, we were so excited about him last year potentially being that guy to step up maybe as that third or fourth linebacker role. He had a foot injury and he couldn't stay healthy. He played in one game and then was able to not be able to be healthy the rest of the year. It comes down to kind of like the Jaden Boggs situation. I just wonder if you're able to get some of those guys healthier. If Caleb Valley has a full season, what is that going to become? Because he had that Fenway Bowl against, I believe, UConn in his first collegiate start, had 9 tackles. I mean, he was all over the field. This is a guy that you wanted to see, and you want to see out of a Florida State linebacker. And they really haven't had that since maybe a Tatum Bethune and Kalen DeLoach in 23. I mean, it comes to a point where you had a Chris Jones that has averaged 130 tackles last year with Southern Miss. You had production, and you stole him away basically from Ole Miss. I just wonder if that's going to transfer in, going to get everything there because they might only need about 2 linebackers, 3 linebackers. But what are your thoughts on the linebackers and how you think they can kind of get everything together for this defense that needs them so much in today's game?
Absolutely. I like Chris Jones to be obviously the starting
Hmm.
linebacker. He's been a guy that everybody has talked about
Yeah.
since he's really transferred in. You have a Caleb, like you said, you had Caleb Lavallee who
Yep.
came in from UNC,
Hmm.
and his brother committed with
Yeah.
him this last.
Hmm.
And I've heard kind of, I haven't heard much talk about his brother,
Yeah.
but
And they do like him. I mean, that's the thing too, is I know these linebackers are very talented. And I get Isaiah Williams is coming off a torn ACL. He's having to kind of readjust himself. Obviously fall camp's going to be a big thing, and that's a huge responsibility to have for a true freshman. You don't want to like have this whole thing. It's not like Jason Lopez where you're having just being able to catch footballs. You're having to read a whole entire defense. You're being a quarterback of the defense. If you're being alongside Chris Jones, for example, if Gaber isn't really where he needs to be right now physically, injury wise. But I mean, if you're able to kind of start those two and you're kind of having to rely on Omar Graham and Blake Nicholson, guys that really haven't emerged or stepped up as much, I like both of those guys, don't get me wrong, but I think that they need to show up in their game too. And then I think the last part that I wanted to bring up was the secondary. I mean, this is a secondary that, has Ashton Barker, who they really love, and then Jabril Rawls, who some are even classifying as a first or a second round pick. I mean, even a Nehemiah Chandler, who I think excels in man-to-man coverage, but it's just kind of like, what are you going to do with some of these guys? How are you going to factor everybody in? Because KJ Kirkland talked about it the best. He talked about the 3 safeties. And if one of those guys are out of position, and I don't want to assume who he was talking shots at, but last year he talked about like one of the safeties was out of position. They were walking, they were not doing things the right way. And it really impacts the defense. It really impacts how you are. And if one guy's out of his game, you're really screwed, and you're playing teams like Alabama on the road, Louisville on a Friday night, Miami on the road, you're playing Clemson the week after that. There's a lot of games here that Florida State could really mess up on, and it all starts with New Mexico State. You cannot take any team lightly because if you get so off your high horse in terms of if you beat an SMU, the rest of the season is going to kind of go by the wayside. And I know Barker is, he's still got some room to grow. And I know he had the incident on when he was playing on stream some video games and talking about some different things with the team. And I know we're past that, but it comes to a point where we cannot let frustrations or emotions or anything like that get in the way because at the end of the day, Florida State's got to be Florida State. They got to win ball games. So I think the 3 safety role with him having that rover position because it's so important with Earl Whittle going to Ohio State is you got to have those guys being able to be successful, and I think Ashton Barker has got to be able to do it.
absolutely, Ashland Barker has got to be the guy that we can rely on. We have Hobbs as a safety, isn't he?
Yeah, it's like a hybrid safety corner. They all like that hybrid safety role. It's really odd how Florida State does some things with their defensive backs. They like to use them in several different spots. So sometimes they like to bring corners over to safety. But Hobbs has played both at Notre Dame.
Another guy, KJ Kirkland.
Hmm.
That's another guy you got to be able to rely on at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And, as far as Rawls and Chandler and all them go, those are guys that can make plays. We know Rawls can make plays. I mean,
Yeah.
he did it really good last year and the
Yeah, and
year before that.
I just wonder too. I mean, Rawls has done a phenomenal job when he's been healthy, but the problem is he's got to stay healthy. We got to make sure he stays healthy with that. Nehemiah Chandler is kind of a unknown, I guess you could say a little bit, but he had some productive time. I mean, Quindarius Jones has had production there, but like at the same time, he's a senior. He's been around for a little bit. He had a season-ending injury last year, kind of cut short. Norvell really loves him. And they have a cornerbacks coach in Blue Adams. You want to see guys be successful, and I just don't know if you're going to have that necessarily because I know you had so much high hopes for last year, and then with Earl Little being that alpha guy, I wonder if Barker can step up and be that guy.
Absolutely. Another guy, speaking of the DBs, you want a Chauncey Kennon to step up.
Yeah.
Granted, I
Mhm.
don't I don't see him getting much playing time this year unless it's,
Yeah.
maybe a blowout game.
Mhm.
But that's definitely a guy that's a freshman that has really high upside.
Yeah, and I wonder too, because you brought up Chauncey Kennon, but I also think about Charles Lester, a
That's
five-star
another good
prospect
one.
that literally needs to play this year. I mean, he is in his third season. He needs to do it. This has got to be the year for him. At some point, and they even talked about this. I can't remember who brought him up. It may have been Blue Adams that had talked about it in a press conference. But he's like, Charles Lester's got to step up. We got to have him play. We got to have him do things the right way. And I agree with him. I think there comes a point where you have to be able to get those guys ready to play, and you're in your third season. Some of these offensive linemen that we talked about before that need development, it's your third year, man. It's your fourth year. You got to do it. We got to do this. Blake Nicholson, Omar Graham Jr. You got to have guys like that that have been around the program. Daniel Lyons, another example. There's guys on this team that have been here for years. We've got to get this done and it's becoming so important. I want to mention something too because I know this is something a lot of fan base wants to talk about too. But the special teams aspect, Norvell talked about how special teams was so important to him when he got hired on at Florida State. And I think it's going to be a most important thing. And I say this coming from a frustrated fan that went to Carter Finley Stadium in Raleigh, North Carolina, and saw two muffs on punts with Squirrel White and with our gunner coming down there and getting hit in the back of the head. I think it was KJ Kirkland to be exact. But, just a thing where you have to have special teams be a factor. And is it going to be a Jason Lopez? Are you going to really rely on a true freshman? I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered there. Will Sam Singleton be your starter at kickoff return? There's a lot of things that you can look at and base off of. But I just wonder, and I think it's kind of an underrated thing because you're having to replace your starting kicker, your starting punter. It's a lot of even your special teams coach is being replaced. So I think that's got to be noticed, or at least a question mark, just to kind of figure out what you have. I know it's a boring part of the game, but it can flip field position in a heartbeat for opposing teams.
Absolutely. You could even have a Sands, the
Yeah.
transfer from FAU.
Uh-huh. Yep.
You can have him back there, like you said, Sam Singleton, another guy that's very speedy.
Mhm.
You can have that. Maybe an Amari Thomas. I mean, there's all kinds of options that you can have in that backfield. Jason Lopez.
Yeah.
There's just so many options that you can put out there.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying like 2023, we didn't really have a great, well, I know we had the deuce span kickoff return that, everybody was talking about with Spawn, with that whole situation, but Keon Coleman wasn't a great punt returner. It wasn't like he was something great. I think he had a pretty decent punt return against Miami, if I remember correctly, that year when Miami wasn't great. It was at home. But I mean, reality though, man, it's like Florida State's got to do this. They've got to get this done. Catch the punt. Let's go about our day. Don't catch it within the 5 yard line, the 4 yard line, unless you have a lot of space and you're confident in yourself to get there. I know Jason Lopez is a youngster. He's got to get stuff done. Man, I just want to see competent special teams play again. Is that so hard to ask for at this point?
Absolutely not with some of these playmakers on the team.
Oh yeah. But we got a couple minutes before we end this recording and everything, but man, I really do appreciate you coming on and talking about the kind of question marks that we have. As a reminder, Norvell is going to be speaking to the media on Sunday night when we're recording this at 9 o'clock. We're going to be having a lot of updates. I'm going to have some video out tomorrow on some different things that he discussed, maybe some high points, key points that I want to discuss about that. But Nole Nation is a great guy. I know he's going to have some great content as we go through the Florida State football season. It's super exciting because we are basically 3 Saturdays away, technically two and some change at this point. Doak Campbell Stadium, I hope, is going to be rocking. It's going to be early in the year. We're going to have some stuff rolling there at night game on the big and bad CW network against New Mexico State. So super excited to see how that pans out and everything. Going to be a great environment for Florida State fans to enjoy. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and as always, go Noles.
Who knows?